So again, we have our kind of three sections to our program: the variables, global setup, and global draw. And let's go ahead and fill this in with the actual code now. All right, so the first thing we need to do is go ahead and define the values for position and speed. So here, whenever we're declaring a variable, remember we need to be able to define its type. So position and speed are both going to be float values, right? Things with decimal points. So let's first start with position. The x position we'll call something like xpos. The y position we'll call ypos, right? And we're just going to declare them now in one line. So this declares that there will be a variable called this and a variable called this. And then we're going to go ahead and leave them just empty for now. We're just going to declare them. But we'll go ahead and define the speed values, right? So the float x speed, this is the speed in the x direction, we'll say at first is going to be 0, right? We want it just to fall down in the y direction, right? So no speed start with x. Then we'll also say that y speed is going to be set to 2. Okay, so it will fall in the positive y direction based on the speed value. All right, and now let's say what's going to be the circle radius, right? How's it going to look? So let's also declare this as a float. We'll call this rad. Float rad equals 20. And again, these are pixels, 20.0 pixels. Okay, great. That's all we need to do for the global variables. So let's move down into the global setup. Notice I've left this line here blank because I need to bring in those keywords that are related to the setup, right? I'm going to say void setup, open and close parentheses, open curly brackets, and down below, close curly brackets. All right, so that all the stuff that I want to happen inside of setup will happen within these curly brackets. Since we're doing this, let's go ahead and do this for draw too, because it's this very similar syntax. Void draw, open curly brackets, and at the end, close curly brackets. Now, if I hit Control-T on my keyboard, that will auto-format everything, so I can see now that here is one block of code containing these lines. That's also going to be found under Edit Auto Format. It's a helpful way to ensure that you have all of your open and close delimiters, these brackets, parentheses, etc., successfully set up. Otherwise, you'll see that things get kind of askew in terms of their alignment. Okay, so we have our setup, we have our draw. Let's go ahead and fill this in. What's the size of our window going to be? Well, let's go ahead and say that for now, the size is going to be 800 by 400. So 800 pixels wide by 400 pixels tall. It's going to be the size of the window. And then after we do that, we're going to go down below and we're going to define the starting location for both x and y, right? These are our positions. So where we left xpos and ypos empty before, we're going to go ahead and define them as having specific values whenever the sketch starts up. All right, so let's go ahead and say that xpos is going to be at the center of the screen. And we know that the display window has a keyword that is attached to the property of width. So we can type width over 2 and that line with the semicolon and go ahead and do ypos equals height over 2. That finds us the center of the display window. All right, and now we've concluded our setup, right? If we wanted to, we could go ahead and hit play up here. We'll see that we get a window. It's 800 by 400 pixels. Right now, nothing's happening. We haven't given it a background color or had our circle do anything yet. But for now, we know that at least the setup looks to be running successfully. So with that, let's go ahead and move on to the draw section. All right, let's define the background color. All right, I like to make my backgrounds white, so I'm going to say that background is 255. Background, right? And then let's go ahead and work with the conditionals, right? This is going to be the tricky part with the new content that we haven't seen before. All right, so how do we set up a conditional? Well, generally it's going to be if a condition is met, do something, and then finish the block of code with a closed curly bracket. Now this isn't going to work because this isn't the correct syntax, but this is how I would describe it in plain language. Right? So the condition we want to test to see if y pos is greater than the height. Remember that the window, if I were to hit play, this is 0, 0. We move positive in the y direction and positive in the x direction. Okay, so if we get to the end of the screen, we need to do something. And the do something is going to be to reverse the direction that the circle is traveling in. The direction the circle is traveling in the y is based on the y speed. So what we'll do is we'll say that y speed times equals -1. That will reverse it. That says set y speed to y speed times -1. Perfect. All right? So that condition would work if we just left it there. All right? Let's see what this is going to happen. So we'll leave our condition as very simple in this case, and we'll come back and give it a little bit more intelligence after we run the sketch a couple times. All right, so the next step is that we want to update the position of the circle. In order to do so, we're just going to say that the x position is going to be equal to x position plus x speed. So the shorthand for that is x pos plus equals x speed. All right, we're going to do the same thing for the y position, plus equals y speed. That will update the position of the circle. And then lastly, we just need to draw the circle, right? Let's say that the ellipse is going to be at x pos, y pos, and the radius in both directions is just going to be rad, which is coming from up here. Remember that you can always select something if you don't know how to use this method. Right-click and say Find in Reference. You can always do that by going to your browser. Going to processing.org and look up in the reference language. We want to make a 2D shape, which is an ellipse, which is right here. And of course, this will tell us what we need to provide: the x-coordinate, y-coordinate, width, and height. Okay, now one other thing we want to do is we want this to be a center-based drawing of the ellipse. By default, it's from corner to corner. So we'll also use the ellipse mode, which says center, right? So we'll say that just before we draw the ellipse, that we'll use ellipse mode, center, all in caps, close parentheses. All right, let's see what this does. I'm going to save this and run it. I had a typo here. Make sure you have a X pos with capital P. All right. So something's happening. Our circle bounces, but then it flies off the top of the screen. All right, so let's get a little bit more specific. First of all, I want my ellipse to look a little better. So what I'm going to do is say that it's not going to have a stroke value, so it's not going to have a line at the edge. And I'm also going to tell it to have a certain color fill. So 0, 120, 255. That's a kind of cyan color. And we can also give it a transparency by giving it a fourth value. So I'll make it mostly opaque. All right, so now my circle is going to look a lot better. All right, and notice right when it gets to the end, something funny is happening. Right, it goes halfway to the edge and then bounces in the other direction. So we want to make our conditional statement a little bit more specific so that what we're seeing is a little bit more consistent with what we expect. Right, so what we're going to do is say that y pos has to be less than height minus the radius. That will ensure that it bounces whenever the very edge of the circle reaches the end. All right. Second thing that happens is that our circle keeps going in this direction once it's been reversed. So we're going to add another condition to the one we have now. By doing so, we're going to say, is it this condition or this condition? Those are the two pipes or up bars on English language keyboard that's just below backspace. So this is our OR logical operator. If this condition is true, or if y pos is less than radius, right, which would be the same condition but at the top. So as this falls, it bounces, gets up here, and reverses in the same way. Okay, that looks great too. What if we were to go ahead and say that we give our circle some x speed? I'm going to go ahead and give this some speed in the x direction, so it's moving at a diagonal. And let's go ahead and see what happens. If you think you know what happens, go ahead and drop your suggestion into the question window, and we'll see if you get it right. Circle bounces at the bottom, bounces at the top, but we haven't specified a condition for what happens at the right edge or left edge. So we're going to do a similar setup here. I'm going to copy and paste this whole chunk of code, this whole block. Do this again, hit Control-T so it gets reformatted. I'm just going to change my variables to be x pos, x speed, and make sure this says width. So now if my circle is moving in a diagonal direction and it reaches one of the edges, it should also bounce off of it. Okay, so now we have our refresher on syntax. We have something that's working successfully. We've used a conditional statement. And one of the things that that we've also done kind of naturally, because it's probably where we started with learning how to program and processing, is that we've included all of the properties that we want to see in our display window as individual variables. Right, now that's totally fine, although once we get to slightly more complex situations, we're going to run into some troubles with that. Okay, so let's take a moment here and answer any questions you might have. If you have any, go ahead and drop them in the question window and we'll address them as a group. All right, let's move on then. I'm going to close this window and save it. And we'll go ahead and open the presentation back up.